All right, this is lesson 111 in your textbook, graphing inequalities using a T-chart. So remember, an inequality is like greater than or less than. If I can get my pen to work. Greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. You graphed inequalities before, but it was more like x is greater than -2. So you had your number line at -2, open circle, if it's greater than, it goes this direction. We graphed x is less than or equal to -2. And remember, if it was equal to, you filled in your circle, and less than goes this direction. You did that a long time ago. Well, you should have. If you didn't, it's fine. We're going to take the same idea, but we're going to graph lines with an inequality instead of an equal sign. So let's just do one so you can see what I'm talking about. This is going to build on what we did last week when we used our T-charts. And remember, I told you to pick 5 values. Now, the reality is when you're graphing these, you probably can just pick 3 numbers. We're going to do this one with 5 because your textbook does it with 5. But then the next ones, we're going to pick 3 numbers. The truth is, you really only need two points to create a line. I always pick 3 just to be on the safe side. And you need to pick a negative and a positive, and I always pick 0 because it's the easiest number to work with. You're not going to be given a T-chart. Just like last week, you're going to have to create your own T-chart. So remember, step 1 is to form a T-chart. Step 2 is to plug my values in and solve for y. Step 3 is to graph those points. The difference today is this little thing right here, and we'll get there in just a second. So step 1 is my T-chart. Well, because I have a computer and I'm teaching the lesson, I've already created my T-chart. Second step is to find y when x is each of these values. So let's start with -2. When x is -2, y is less than, and the reality is when we're solving these, just pretend that's an equal sign. -1. The symbol doesn't matter when you're getting your points, okay? So -1, I'm going to just go ahead and make it an equal sign. -1 plus 1 is 0. If I plug in 0, y equals 0 plus 1, so it's +1. When I plug in 1, y equals 1 plus 1, which is 2. When I plug in 2, y equals 2 plus 1, which is 3. So I have created my T-chart. For this problem, I'm going to pick all those 5. From here on out, I'm only going to pick 3. And the reality is, unless you're told to pick a certain amount of numbers, 3 is always going to be sufficient. So after we've filled in our T-chart, we've plugged in our values for x, we've solved for y, we now have points we're going to put on a graph. And because I have it on a computer, I have already, well, if I can get there, I think apparently I don't have a graph. You hear some lovely noises. All right, well then I'm going to draw one. So x -2, y -1. There's my first point. X -1, y 0. Oops. Let me erase that point. Actually, I'm not going to erase that first point. If I hit the eraser on that, I'm going to erase the whole line. My third point is 0, +1. Then x is 1, y is 2. X is 2, y is 3. Now, I can see very clearly where my line is. Here's where the difference is this week. If it is less than or equal to, nope, that's not the right words. If it is greater than or less than, instead of using, so last week I just drew a line. I just said, okay, there's my line. This week is slightly different. If it is less than or greater than, I'm going to use a dotted line. If it includes equal to, then I use a solid line. So less than or greater than is a dotted line. And now this is telling me y is less than. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in below it, because whatever value I'm looking for, it is less than that line. So technically, that whole picture there is my answer. T-chart it, plug my values in, get points. If it is less than or greater than, I'm going to use a dotted line, not a solid line. And then if it is less than, I'm going to shade below it. And the opposite of that would be if it's greater than, I'm going to shade above it. Let's do another one just to be on the safe side. All right, so we're told to graph this problem. I am telling you, there's no need to do more than 3 points. Just do 3 points. And if you will use -1, 0, and 1, I know some of you are not going to like that negative, but that should give you a good range of values to make a line. So I'm going to plug in my values for x to find my what y is, so I can have some points to graph. So when x is, oh, my pen quit. There we go. When x is -1. So remember, when I'm solving it, I'm going to just pretend it is an equal sign. -1 plus 1 is 0, so y equals 0. So when x is -1, y is 0. I don't really like this red. Let me go back to black. So now I'm going to plug in x for 0. Nope, 0 for x. So y equals 2 times 1, y equals 2. So when x is 0, y is 2. Now let's plug in 1. Y equals 2 times 2, so y equals 4. So when x is 1, y is 4. Now, let me clean all this mess up. I guess I don't have to clean that up actually, because I don't even need that space now. So I've made my t-chart. I plugged in my values, and now all I need to do is plot those points, draw my line, and shade in the correct things. Remember, if it is greater than or less than, I use a dotted line. If it is greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, I use a solid line. This one is greater than or equal to, so I'm going to use a solid line. So I'm going to plot my points. X -1, y 0, right there. X 0, y 2, right there. X 1, y 4, right there. And I can see my line. I always use 3 points. Technically, I only need 2, but I always do 3 sort of as a safety net, because if one of those dots doesn't line up, I've messed up somewhere. Now I'm going to draw my line. Because it is greater than or equal to, that should be a straight line. I can draw a straight line, and the reality is there needs to be arrows on that. But now it is greater than, which means I need to shade in everything above it because it is greater than. And that's it. So T-chart it, fill those values in, draw your line. If it's greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, it's a straight line. If it's just greater than or less than, it's a dotted line. And then if it's greater than, you shade above. If it's less than, you shade below. That's it. Let's do one more. So your first couple of things are very like the same thing you did last week. Number 1, make your T-chart. In this case, just pick 3 values for x. Plug those values in for x and solve for y. When you're solving that, just treat it like an equal sign, unless, remember, you end up dividing by a negative. Because remember, when you're working with an inequality symbol, if you divide by a negative number, the direction of that inequality flips. I don't know that you're going to have any of that, because I think all of these are already y equals form, but just in case. Then you're going to plot those 3 points and graph your line. You have to remember, if it's greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, it's a solid line. If it's just greater than or less than, it's a dotted line. And then if you're dealing with graders, shade above, less thans, shade below. For homework, I want you to do numbers 1 and 2, so it'll be classwork and activity on lesson 111. Just worry about 1 and 2. Number 3 is kind of a review of geometry, but it's using like square roots and decimals, and it's very confusing. So just 1 and 2 on lesson 111.